This project is made possible by support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Missouri Arts Council, and the Kansas City Art Institute. Welcome to the Mother Ann podcast, where women who are both artists and mothers discuss their diverse experiences as creators and caregivers. I'm Eleanor Lynn Midyett, project manager and co-curator of the Mother Ann Project and assistant professor of liberal arts at the Kansas City Art Institute. I'm also the mother of 4 sons. Each episode features discussions with artists and other individuals involved in the Mother Ann exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy-Voulkos Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. The exhibit and the podcast disrupt preconceived notions that parenthood diminishes one's artistic practice and celebrate motherhood as a source of expansive creative potential.
Well, I've liked to think that I've always tried to encourage observation as a really important action that they need to practice, right? Critically looking and thinking. And that kind of, in art making, anything's fair game. It's all about your ability to express your own personal observations, which are just yours.
In this episode, I speak with artist mother Althea Murphy-Price.
Hi, my name's Althea Murphy-Price. To describe my practice media-wise, I might say I dabble in a variety of different things. I work in 2D and work on papers. So I consider myself a printmaker. I consider myself a sculptor, or at least a wannabe, and I have also done some photography in my work.
So you describe yourself as a printmaker, and that's an important aspect of your practice. Why printmaking?
Well, one of the things that I love about printmaking is that comes up in the context of this exhibit that I think about is the print as inherently female. And because the print generates, right? The print is replicable. And one of my previous professors in graduate school, an amazing artist and theorist, Catherine Reeves, wrote an article about the matrix as female because the nature of editioning print is much like the quality of female as well as and mother, right? And I just love that thought. It's taking, and I think that's what printmaking is really has a lot of components to connecting process with concepts that have metaphor, right? There's a lot of these processes in printmaking that I use as metaphor in my own work. But that is one quality of printmaking that does feel like it definitely forms a relationship, is the print as female. The last aspect I could think of that connects that as well in my own work is the relationship of in printmaking to making when the image is replicated, it's a mirroring image of itself. And so I oftentimes think about that in my own work and concepts as relating to perception or appearance, is like one is looking at the other. So I find a lot of inspiration in that.
Did you always know that you wanted to be an artist?
I think my path might be really similar to I imagine it's similar to a lot of artists, because growing up, I always had an affinity for making things. Of course, I just like to make things. I didn't want any expectations to be associated with that. Now I know how much that is like an artist. I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do. I just wanted to do it. And it was something I always did. So it came naturally. But then moving into school and like the context of like picking a direction, thinking about college and a major, I really quickly divorced from that and said, well, I'm going to go into science. I'm going to be, I have a love for like plant sciences. So like I'm going to study this or I'm going to study that, something different, right? More acceptable. And it didn't take too long for me to realize after maybe actually it took long enough for me to get some bad grades that I want to be true to myself and pull, and kind of shift directions. Now, all this while, and this is while I'm in college, of course, I'm still taking these art classes, but I didn't care if I didn't get credit for them, which is crazy. Talk about devaluing, so yeah, I think it was really in college that I decided to say, I'm going to focus on this as a direction. And in order to be okay with that, I had to tell myself, I am going to be the best at it. I don't know that I've been the best at it, but I told myself I have to approach this tenaciously. I have to approach it professionally, because if I couldn't take this seriously, then other people won't either. So yeah, I dove pretty head in once I had made that decision. But, I was always told, at least by my family, that the question would come up when I was younger. Oh, where do you think she gets this from? Or,
the creative spirit.
yeah, that interest, And it's only now that I recognize there's so many other women in my family who were somehow active and busy too, right? In some form of making. I didn't just it was definitely in my DNA, right? To end up in this path.
Okay, now you have me curious. What kind of things did you make? What kind of medium did you work in, growing up then?
Anything I could get my hands on, so a lot of some of the kind of more typical stuff that one might think of with paints and paper, but then trying to invent mediums and invent things too, right? Asking yourself those crazy questions that can I take this and glue this to that? Or can I mix this into that and make a paint color, or, with organic things and such, lots of alchemy, mixing
kind
up
of
stuff, right?
Thinking outside the box, yeah.
Yeah.
Really, it sounds like you've always been an artist and then finally acknowledged that that's what you want to do. But you're also a mother.
Absolutely. I have 2 daughters, and my oldest daughter just recently turned 13, so I've entered the teens, and my youngest is 10. So they're not too far apart, but they're just far apart enough to be at different life stages, significant enough life stages. And I really like having 2 daughters.
So do your daughters, do they serve as creative inspiration?
Mm-hmm. There's so much there, honestly. And I think, and that's why I kind of bring up the fact that they're girls, because I think that feels like a direct extension of my own creative practice and interest, is thinking about what makes femininity, what is what is girlhood versus womanhood. And these are things I was thinking about before I had children. In fact, I kind of felt like I conjured up before I got pregnant and even was thinking about it. It was really kind of early on when I started thinking about using imagery that comes from childlike things. I was thinking about toys or candy and things like that. And this is before I actually got pregnant and I didn't think I was quite thinking about that at the time. So definitely. So being a mother has just helped further, in a lot of respects, inform my own interest. And then also definitely has informed the materials and the approach to art making, just by the nature of osmosis, being around them.
Yeah, your work really captures that childlike wonder, especially through your color palette, I think, and then also the selection of objects that you focus on. So there are some interesting objects that you focus on, particularly in the exhibition. You have two works that you're showing. First Aid, I think, is one with Band-Aids, right? And then the one with the bobby pins. Yeah, can you talk about those works?
Yeah, both of those are images of objects that are kind of familiar, well, kind of, they are familiar objects, right, in our day-to-day world, and they are rendered so that they are to scale. They're also prints, so each one is done in an edition that's, I feel less relevant, but but in some ways definitely part of practice, right? And they both also have a bit of a tactile quality to them, which is intended in my printing methods to always have some element that solicits some interest or desire to touch or some tactility, because I think that's like linked to understanding, right? And so, yeah, First Aid was a piece that I made during COVID. And the reason I mentioned that is because it really does kind of represent that time, or my response during that time. And well, there was a lot of things to think about at that time, right? Of course, we're thinking about our own self-care and thinking about others' care. The Black Lives Matter movement was really active at that time too. And what made me kind of stumble upon like using an image of Band-Aids was, again, is connected to my role as a mother, right? Kind of really an attraction to these Band-Aids that have extra colors or skin tone. And, a Band-Aid is something that we put on as a temporary fix, and it's protection, but it's also, there's also an element of comfort to a Band-Aid, right? It doesn't necessarily fix the problem, but it does like kind of give us some time, right, to deal with it.
Yeah, which I think is really sort of inherent in a mother's role. Like mothers, we're sort of the first givers of first aid, right? We're the first line. And you always have Band-Aids in your bag, just in case something. And if you don't, I always travel with Band-Aids. But I think you're right. Like eventually, in some ways, our role as mother is like temporary. Of course, a mother's care is enduring, but that other role of like preparing our children so that they can go out into the world and take care of themselves. But that Band-Aids are sort of like give this comfort then that allows healing, and then also allows them to, feel enough comfort and then kind of go out into the world.
Yeah,
So.
and this piece, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but it was just recently included in the Cleveland Clinic's their collection. So I thought they found that connection there too.
Yeah. So what about the other piece, Bed of Needles, and what was the concept behind that, and how did that come about?
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely a kind of a shared thought between these two pieces that I might point out as this relationship of harm or hurt, and or maybe just caution, right? Maybe that's a little bit more accurate. This piece is screen printed, and it's several images of bobby pins. And the bobby pins are layered and stacked as I printed on each other in a way that's intended to kind of build some areas where they look a little bit more dense, and some that are maybe a little bit more sparse. And they're all faced, the end points are faced vertical or faced upward. And I think about this as a landscape in some ways, like a bed of grass or like sod in a way, or ground. Yeah, and that to me, that relates to path. Like I think of that connection as a path or a surface that one might associate with like walking upon. Yeah, so lots of different thoughts related to that. And I have, it's one of a series of prints that under this theme of using objects that find relationship to appearance, hair, and maintenance, and that all have this kind of sense of suggestion that they might be sharp, or they might be cautionary in use, but they also I see them as tools too. So kind of a dual purpose.
I think it's really fascinating that you take these everyday objects and then they're very familiar, I think, to the viewer, but then you also defamiliarize them in a way that makes the viewer think about things in a really different way. And I think that's one of the aspects of your work that I really love. So Let's talk a little bit more about the hair, because you have a series with barrettes and then with the bobby pins, and then you actually have a series where you have different kinds of hair. And it's an exhibition in Paris too. Yeah, congratulations on that. So when I see these works and I know that you have two, learning that you have two daughters, first of all, I think about the daily ritual of fixing hair that
Absolutely.
can sometimes be a battle. Can you tell us if that relates at all? Your experiences with your girls then, and all the metaphors or all the objects that relate to hair.
Yeah, well, definitely the ritual. That's definitely a relationship there. But I guess I might start off by saying that on this topic of hair, is I've always been really fascinated by how we see ourselves in the world and how others see and see us. So on the topic of appearance, and I've taken a particular fascination in the role of how we use decoration as a mode of disguise or a mode of alteration. I think there's lots of topics that get wrapped up into that, like assimilation and individuality and things like that. The topics that I've found really related to that has been the topic of hair. As I tend to say, like hair culture. I've used a lot of hair, synthetic hair in particular, in my artwork over the years, and then other things that I associate with decoration, or at least like ornaments, things like barrettes and braiding, and then more recently these objects like combs, bobby pins, needles, that sort of thing. To me, they all have that connection to the act, performance, maintenance of our bodies. And for me, pose these questions too about truth. I don't want to say necessarily like false, but also the synthetic. And that's really influenced the materials I've used. As I mentioned before, I'm using printmaking, but I've found that when I'm working sculpturally, or I'm like building work with my hands, I've worked with a lot of plastic too, because that's what synthetic hair is. So those are those connections. And this exhibit that I've had recently in Paris, this was very exciting to participate in. And to me, there was a really big statement attached to that, because I was contacted by a South African curator living in Paris for that exhibition. And it's universal, right? And so it's like there are all these people participating in this exhibit, and there are artists from Germany, artists from all over, and I don't remember all of the particular places, but they're all talking about this shared experience, right, associated with hair. That's powerful. There's a lot of exhibitions I've participated in that are with a theme of hair. But I think this, nationally, I've done that, but I think this said a lot internationally, that some universality to it. Yeah.
I see this as really kind of a common thread between your mothering, your artistic practice, and also how you see the world. This idea of, being aware and conscious of the expectations on young girls, women, women of color in terms of appearance. And, you talked a little bit about kind of disguise and masking and all that. When you talk about your work, or do you talk to your girls about your work and some of the ideas, behind it, and how do they react to all of this? Because I'm sure they're drawn to your work because, these are objects that they interact with every day, but then here it is in mom's studio practice. So what are the discussions that go on between you and your girls about your work?
Right. And that's a really great question. And there's definitely familiarity with the materials. There's a lot of kind of question, I think, that comes up between seeing these materials used in life and then also seeing them exist in my artwork. It's like, the question of why. To personalize this a little bit more, in my own life practice and on my own maintenance of my hair, when my daughters were a lot younger, I would change my hair quite a bit, right? And try different ways and different approaches with hair, and using synthetic hair too. And and right away they would kind of try to they would question that. And sometimes it felt like calling me out in a way, like, why are you doing this? That's not the way your hair looks. Wait a minute. Like, and it's not that they didn't understand how it worked or asked any questions like, how did your hair grow? They knew exactly. I wasn't hiding anything. But they didn't also quite understand why I would want to do that or why I would make the effort to do that. And I do think in some respects now they see that connection between things I do in my own life and how they might be extensions of exploration in an artist practice too.
It's interesting that they see it as personal, like they see it a little bit as personal exploration of their mom. But I think also on another level, just this idea of making them aware of those types of issues when they make their own choices about their own maintenance and beauty routine and all of that. Has their attitude changed as they've gotten older now, especially now that you have a teenager?
Well, I've liked to think that I've always tried to encourage observation as a really important action that they need to practice, right? Critically looking and thinking. And that kind of, in art making, anything's fair game. So there's not one way of thinking about how you can make as an artist, or there's not one way that an artist is more validated than another. It's all about your ability to express your own personal observations, which are just yours, right? Unique to you. So yeah, I don't think much has changed now. I think they're far less inquisitive about about what their mother does and more interested in what they do, of course.
We've been hearing that a lot from the artist mothers that we've been interviewing. When I ask them, well, what do your children think about their work? Mostly they say, do my children even think about my work? It's just that thing that mom does, I think. So I think that's pretty common. So you train them in many ways, like to have this artist's observation, right? To be keenly aware of their environment and different things around them. Do they have their own artistic practice, or are they creatives?
Yeah. And I haven't had to make any efforts to do that. I haven't had to try to make it grow because it's been just so natural. Oftentimes I find myself envious of them because they're more artists than I am. I mean, they're like making things all the time, whereas I can't even seem to find the time to like sit down and get it done, But they're like, they're inspired by something they see and they go to making it, right? I love that. I've found it really inspiring. Now, whether or not they would want to be an artist themselves, I don't know about that, nor would I push them to do that. But it's definitely there quite naturally. And in other respects too, right? They explore other ways too that are not just fine art making. But
yeah. Any specific medium or specific work that stands out to you?
Well, I laugh because I feel like I can't say anything specific because everything becomes just a mess. This messes. Medium wise, I mean, it's like my youngest child, she tries to experiment a lot with like food and temperature changes and things like that. So things that, solid to liquid, all sorts of things. She was, of course, like one of those that really loved slime making. But you know what? She also has like invented some things that were very like, that are their print process with things like saran wrap, and she's all over the place. My other daughter exhibits a lot more control in what she does and really likes to draw to narrate. And she likes to try to tell a story, something beginning to end. It's two really different approaches, ways of thinking. Yeah, it's definitely fun.
Yeah, fun to see that creative pathway evolve and unravel. So you are obviously a role model, I think, to your daughters. Growing up and even through your art education, do you feel like you had role models, that inspired you to become an artist?
Mm-hmm. No, not really. It sounds a bit frank, but there were definitely artists all around me growing up and in my family, but I wasn't aware of that early on. I wasn't able to see that relationship. When I went to college, I think if anything, that was a really telling time to me and informing me based on my professors, the artists that I learned and read about. They really informed me, what does that mean, or what it might look like to lead an artist's life. And it's not to say my professors weren't mentors. Of course, they were in many regards, but it was also very telling that most of my women professors were not married and did not have children. And then reading in my, art history books, for me, really learning about African American history, really pivotal for me. And I did look to those artists to be mentors in many regards, but I found a very similar story there to the same people that were teaching me as well. They had to make choices in choosing their practice over other things. That's definitely changed now. I have lots of mentors, now in a lot of respects. But at the time, I thought that this kind of lack of seeing an artist or seeing a professional artist with a life that I also wanted to imagine for myself, I didn't see the scale seem a bit off balance. It wasn't just the lack of women role models that I experienced, but it was really the lack also of Black women role models who were artists. And I think in general, it speaks to the real continued need for female educators of color. I did have a few Black women artists to look up to really largely when I studied in college, when I studied at a historically Black college, Spelman College. And that was eye-opening. I mean, that was just such a formidable time period for me to see women as our historian and see women as scholars that are working also creatively in that way. I feel like really what's key and important to thinking about how important our educations are is it really then sets the tone for what you choose to pursue. If I had been able to see more examples, I would have pursued an artist career without question, right? But it was the lack of being able to see that really meant I had to invent it or imagine it for myself. And that's kind of scary to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think role models are really important. Do you feel like your daughters have, I mean, they have you, obviously. Do you think they have others in their lives too?
Yeah, well, they are fortunate by way of me to be exposed to lots of different people. And I think the beauty of that is that they can see it as a choice, but they don't have to see it as their only choice. They feel really comfortable in saying, nope, I don't think I want to do that. But because they have a certain understanding and a certain understanding of what that looks like, an artist's career looks like. And that's definitely an advantage for them, regardless of what they choose.
You mentioned finding inspiration from the women in your family and how you recognized that they had always been creatives and they were always makers. And this really reminds me of an Alice Walker essay, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And in that essay, she writes about how in search of my mother's gardens, I found my own, how oftentimes family members didn't have a clear pathway to be professional artists, but that they expressed their creativity in all these other ways and how that planted the seed for her. Do you find that true for you too, that, in witnessing your family, the women in your family as creatives and makers, that kind of showed you a path to, to being an artist?
Yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well. That just it really does strike a chord. In fact, in my family, on both sides of my family, I saw this manifest in two different ways. And I think they've been so fundamental to the type of artist that I've become. On one side of my family, there were just women that were busybodies. They were creatives. They made with their hands. They were making quilts. They were making clothes. There was just nothing that they weren't making. Predominantly, it was clothing. It was jackets and quilts and blankets and things like that. They were women who were knitters, crocheters, so they did it all. And And on another side of my family, I think about these women still, and they inspire me because they were just beautiful. They were regal in their appearance and how they carried themselves. They made every point to make sure that when they entered the world and they got prepared, that everyone would look, right? I'm thinking to grandmothers and aunts. They would take a lot of effort in caring for themselves and what their appearance looked like. So they wore wigs, they wore hats, grand hats, matching outfits. They wore the perfume, the makeup, and it was just part of how I understood them to be, of course. But man, I just thought they were always so exceptional in that act. And it was a creative act as well, right? They put a lot of effort into that. And I still, to this day, I'm so inspired by them and all the objects and efforts that they made.
Yeah, I see how that could be a thread really to your studio practice. And I appreciate how you're saying how beauty and personal care can be a form of artistic expression. And then I think how that made you pay attention to all these objects that help to, curate this appearance and in a really positive and confident,
Confident.
feminine way. And that really comes across, I think, in your work. It is sort of this positive commentary on what appearance can be if you have agency and you take control of it. So yeah, role models are so important, I think, and because they show what's possible. So I'm so excited about this exhibition and project because just artists like yourself and the other artist mothers who are exhibiting just show the various pathways to being an artist mother. And it doesn't always have to look one way. It can look all these different ways. Did you ever feel that motherhood was a challenge to your art practice, or maybe the world's expectation for motherhood posed a challenge to you?
Oh, definitely. It's not that it posed a challenge. It was. It is a challenge. Many perks, but lots of disadvantages professionally. I remember right as I found out I was pregnant, I was meeting with a gallery and I mentioned that. And I said, well, I just found out I'm pregnant, and not in a very excited or celebratory way. And she looked back at me. She's like, oh, that's too bad. Well,
oh my.
I said, well, maybe we'll consider this, maybe we'll be able to consider this down the line. And this is just like 15 years ago, not less than that,
wow.
12 years ago.
Wow.
So I think there's the reality is that it does impact what you're able, you can do anything, right? But it does definitely impact how much you can do. There has been in the professional world, right, and an expectation that we don't share these additional things in our lives, right? The hurdles in our lives shouldn't interfere with our work life. And so we just try to, swallow and stomach it and figure it out behind the scenes and not tell anybody that we're really struggling when it comes to these type of things. One of the things I've loved, at least now I feel like working in this art field and working with other artists, is working with yourself is really the graciousness to be understanding, to give time, to be patient, and recognizing that that's support, right? And feeling supported. I have some wonderful colleagues who have been so supportive in really mentoring me to be able to be comfortable saying what I need and saying what I can't do. That's a big part of learning how to be a mother, I think.
Yeah, that's so lovely that you say that, because I think that it's a paradigm shift for artists. I think for a long time, I think this idea of artists in the patriarchy is, we just want to see the artist, the artist who will do everything for their work and sacrifice everything. But that's not realistic, because artists are people and there's all these dimensions, motherhood being a potential, dimension. So you've talked about the professional world, and you're a professor at the University of Tennessee. Does mothering come into that at all? Does that impact your teaching practice?
Yeah, well, I was always told that becoming a mother would make me a better teacher. Um, I don't know if it has, but I hope it has. Um, yeah, it does. It definitely, I think being a mother is being a teacher. I hope that actually teaching has made me a better mother, kind of in the reverse, because I think about how I explain, I think about how I communicate. I think teaching has provided a way of understanding the a necessary structure to getting across information and or being encouraging. Definitely, I think back to this topic of mentorship. Teaching is also this great opportunity for students to mentor to students. So I think, at least I like to think that my students witnessing me as professional and mother is a great example for them, and also teaching them maybe even some of the same patience or sensitivity, because I oftentimes I'll have my I used to at times teach with my baby on my back, right? I mean, I did several demonstrations where I just couldn't find care and they were kicked out of daycare because of, I don't know, an ear infection or they're on something like that, and you just feel like you have to make it work all the time. But I used to really feel very private about that, engaging my family life with my teaching life. And I've just learned to really just embrace it and accept it as this informs them too, in a way of what they might see for their own future, or might support them being a good coworker. I think that's been a unique role that I can serve.
Do you feel like things are shifting considerably then for artist mothers?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think, God bless COVID, back to COVID, because I think in general, that time period just taught all of us to be more comfortable with learning how to say no. I hear myself even talking about this time period when my daughters were younger. And I think there were a lot of times where I was still trying to bend over backwards to do everything and had to learn that, like, I don't. We just don't. We can prioritize ourselves. That was something that I had to learn also, and that people can be, patient, and you can be patient with yourself too, most importantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for you to be part of the Mother and exhibition and the podcast series. What does it mean to you to be a part of this exhibition, and why did you say yes when I approached you to be in the show?
When I got your email for this show, I thought, oh, I saw it as a really warm acknowledgement in my own work that you could find its relationship to this part of my life. And without words, without having known you, and without like having given you some sort of artist statement. But I saw it as kind of a recognition, honestly, and also a recognition of the and part of that title, that acknowledgement of myself as well as a professional, not just a mother, right? I say just a mother, but not to diminish any of those things there, it's and. And so, so I liked that about that as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for highlighting the and, because I'm really proud of that too. I feel like I think professionally, a lot of times people discount mothers because they feel like their focus will only be on their children. And so then they can't focus on anything else, and they can't be effective and successful at other things. But the truth is that there are so many skills about being a mother: time management, multitasking, empathy, all these things, I think, that make it possible to be a mother and all these other things. So all the endless possibilities. So thank you so much, Althea, for showing us the possibility of that through your practice and your mentorship.
Thank you so much for having me participate in this.
This podcast was produced by Clio Scroll Productions, with Kara Heitz as the director and Emily Milner as the audio engineer. Music is by Brooke Tooley and the Moon Travelers. The Mother and project team includes Eleanor Lim Midyet, project manager and co-curator, Courtney Wasson, co-curator, Laura Berman, senior consultant, Stephanie Leedy-Voulkos Art Center owner and mother of the Crossroads. Erin Woodworth, Leedy-Voulkos Gallery Manager, and Debbie Barrett-Jones, Leedy-Voulkos Gallery Assistant. An extra thank you to the Kansas City Artists Coalition, Distribution by Air Company, and Hotel Indigo for their support. Don't forget to listen to the other episodes of the Mother and podcast, and also remember to check out the Mother and exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy-Voulkos Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. More information can be found on their website at www.leedy-voulkos.com. That's www.leedy-voulkos.com. Thanks for listening.